Within the past 20 years, a revolution has hit modern American television audiences. When not watching shows about high school show choirs or drunk, overly bronzed adolescents partying on the beaches of the East Coast, Americans have become enamored with watching shows about cooking. Surprisingly, cooks and chefs such as Rachel Ray, Bobby Flay, and Alton Brown have become household names. Now, while this craze of cooking may just seem like a recent trend, it's actually been an integral part of our society for millions of years. In fact, even our evolutionary ancestors enjoyed the benefits of cooking. According to an article published by the London Telegraph on February 17, 2011, if our evolutionary ancestors had not begun to cook, the modern human species probably wouldn't exist. Richard Wrangham, the author of this theory, published his findings in his book, Catching Fire: How Cooking Made Us Human. Now, whether creationist, evolutionist, or just somewhere in between, concepts of evolution are being discussed in the public debates, the school system, and sometimes in speech competitions like these. Therefore, having a fundamental knowledge of the theory of evolution is imperative, and this theory could change what we know. So today, in order to understand how what happens in the kitchen has molded our society, we'll first have a clear understanding of Wrangham's theory, and second, analyze some impacts of what a March 2nd, 2010 BBC News article is calling the most impactful dietary change in the history of, well, life. But first, in order to understand how cooking has made us human, we have to have a clear understanding of Wrangham's theory. According to an article published by The Australian on January 16, 2010, Wrangham argues approximately 2 million years ago, an ape-like species called Australopithecus existed instead of modern humans. Now, physically, Australopithecus was built with a few main differences. They were built with a larger stomach, as well as larger teeth. Both of these specifications were necessary due to the starchy nature of vegetation our bodies were forced to break down. An NPR article of August 2nd, 2010 tells us that man was forced to continually eat, sometimes chewing up to 6 hours per day, not only due to the low level of calories in leaves and berries, but also due to the amount of energy required to digest this food. However, this continued until a first evolutionary leap, when man began to eat meat. While eating meat did allow the body to absorb an extra amount of calories, still, a large amount of energy had to be used on the digestion process. But Wrangham tells us in an August 27, 2010 interview with the Center for Inquiry that once we began to cook, we no longer had the need to eat continually. In fact, he did a study with this idea and he presented his findings in a presentation at Harvard University. In his study, Wrangham had 2 groups of rats that he fed at the same time each day. One group of rats was fed raw yams, while the other was fed cooked yams. After merely days, Wrangham was able to notice that the rats fed raw yams, represented by the blue and red bar lines on this graph, had lost a large percentage of their body weight, while the rats fed cooked yams, represented by the yellow and green lines, had actually maintained, or in some instances even gained, a small amount of weight. A similar situation can be seen in the lives of our evolutionary ancestors, where this simple dietary change played a huge role in their everyday living. Now that we've whet our appetite on the specifics of Wrangham's theory, we can discuss some impacts his theory could provide. And we'll do this in 2 areas. First, the physical impacts, and second, the social impacts. But first, on the physical side, before man began to cook its food, it was built with a much larger stomach. However, you can't have both a large stomach and a large brain. Anthropologist Leslie Ilo stated in an August 2nd, 2010 Vermont Public Radio broadcast that the stomach was an energy hog, and the brain, it was the poor stepsister, left to feed off of the energy leftovers. Professor Peter Wheeler from John Moores University in London, England, stated in the previously cited BBC News article that once we began to cook, we had approximately 20% more energy to use on other processes. Coincidentally, the size of the brain also increased by 20%. Another physical impact comes in the size of our teeth. Before man began to cook his food, it was built with large teeth so he could chomp and chew on raw vegetation for 6 hours per day. However, with the introduction of cooking, food became softer, and in turn, over the evolutionary cycle, the size of our teeth shrank. Now that we've discussed some physical impacts, we can move on to some social impacts. First, in an April 20th, 2010 interview with BigThink.com, Wrangham tells us that food now had to be guarded as it was cooked because of the introduction of theft into society. Previously, man could immediately consume its food, but now that he had to sit down and have patience, he began to abandon its food. And in turn, others would steal. Another social impact comes in the idea of community. In an online exhibit entitled, "What Does It Mean to Be Human?" by the Smithsonian National Museum for Natural History, last updated February 22nd, 2011, we can learn that once we began to cook, specific communities began to form. Or in other words, people just like to get together and eat. So with Wrangham's theory, there are important physical and social impacts. Today, we've examined the idea of how cooking has made us human. We first discussed the specifics of Wrangham's theory, and second, analyzed some impacts his theory could provide. Now, while it's no surprise that Rachael Ray and Tyler Florence have become household names, they make delicious food. It is surprising to think that Rachael Ray and one of the world's most renowned anthropologists from Harvard University are discussing the same subject. So, the next time you pick up your favorite greasy food and you're scolded with the phrase, "You are what you eat," you can nibble away with the delicious knowledge that you're not what you eat, you're how you eat.